for doggedly sticking with this issue. I'd also like to thank the Noble Lord Wolfston of Tregeaga for organising the MOJ teaching, which I found very interesting, useful. I learnt a lot and I listened hard. I thought this amendment was actually a nuanced and sensitive way of dealing with all of the objections raised by the MOJ at that teaching, so I'm rather disappointed that the government haven't accepted Lord Blencathra's proposal, which is a bespoke amendment that protects women's single-sex spaces while sympathetically and practically managing any particular difficult challenges faced by trans women prisoners. The amendment might be a modest proposal, I think it is, but my lords may be interested that it has created a huge amount of interest outside of this place over the last couple of days. Maybe people on Twitter might look at hashtag keep prisons single sex. It's been trending for the last 36 hours, but do look, because actually the messages on there are what I'm talking about rather than that it's trending. And I just wanted to read a few tweets that could maybe help us understand why this amendment matters. One, I find it quite baffling that this is even up for discussion. How did we get to a point where we need a debate to include legislation to prevent something so damaging to women, says one. Another says, women in UK prisons must not be locked in with convicted male criminals. This is an appalling failure of the duty of care the state has for female prisoners. Female prison staff must not be forced to search male prisoners. Let's hope the House of Lords shows sense. I'd like to think the House of Lords would as well, but maybe not. The final one I want to read out is it says, I've been to prison and I'm telling you now that for some women it's their only safe space due to abuse on the outside. Allowing anyone who claims to feel like a woman to be put in that safe space is wrong. Women, criminal or not, deserve to feel safe. And I say hear, hear to that. And I quoted that last tweet because I think it's important to consider what female prisoners think about this issue. At the teaching, the MOJ, and in fact a couple of comments from already, contributions from our Noble Lords, were keen to reassure us, the MOJ at the teaching, that operational staff say that policies are working well. But I think we have to say, who says they're working well and who are they working well for? I've been told by women prisoners I'm in contact with, or have been in contact with, and indeed female prisoners officers, that they're not so happy with the arrangements and are concerned, and that's why I read out that tweet. But all of this anyway is hearsay, isn't it? It's just what I'm saying or what a tweet says or what indeed the MOJ say about operational success. The whole area would benefit from government commissioning some independent research. I wondered whether my lords had seen the research published in the British Journal of Criminology recently and reported in the Times. It was researched by Dr Matthew Maycock, a former employee of the Scottish Prison Service, and it contained some valuable insights. For example, female prisoners interviewed suggested that some of those who identified as women while incarcerated with them had reverted back to identifying as males again on release. Also, the research revealed that female officers in Scotland feel uncomfortable at being forced to do intimate body searches of prisoners who still have male genitalia. And to note on a Freedom of Information request on that, because we've heard of instances of people living for many years as having transitioned, that in that Freedom of Information request, it revealed that of the 12 trans-identifying prisoners convicted of violent and sexual crimes and housed in Scottish women's jails, only one had undertaken medical and surgical transition. So can we please remember that what we're talking about is something that's slightly different than has been described. Unfortunately, the Scottish Prison Board has not used that research and have decided to develop their own policy, preferring to conduct their own research, which I'm not sure about. But anyway, I know that the UK government are keen on expert advice, and I'm delighted to hear that the Minister is going to look at more research, because there really are some great academic and independent experts out there who could really shine some light on what is really going on in prison and how prison policy is working or not as far as prison officers and prisoners are concerned. During the debate initiated by Lord Blencathra at the committee stage and also at the teaching, I felt that all of the spotlight was on the welfare and rights of the trans women prisoners rather than on women prisoners. And whenever some of us raised the welfare and rights of women prisoners, they were almost treated as somehow secondary. For example, we were told that the female prisoners shouldn't worry about sharing quarters with transgender prisoners because those transgender prisoners would have been through a risk assessment process. But that risk assessment process is all about which transgender prisoners are assessed as being suitable to be managed safely on the women's estate. This puts the focus of risk vis-à-vis an institution's organisational capacity rather than the risk to women or indeed how women might feel about it. It was also argued that this present policy is necessary because a minority of trans women could face unacceptable risk if housed in male prisons. And we've heard that, again, described by a couple of noble lords. Of course these prisoners should be protected and kept safe. But let's be honest, they aren't the only group of male prisoners who face risk or violence on the male estate. Vulnerable young men also can face violent bullying, even rape, sexual assault. Look at the levels of self-harm in the male estate. Such a problem that Suicide Watch is too often an everyday reality for too many frightened male prisoners on the male estate. This, of course, is unacceptable, and the solution should be to make the male estate safer and fit for purpose for all, perhaps tackling overcrowding, understaffing, etc. What the solution should not be, in any instance of any vulnerable male prisoner feeling unsafe on the male estate, is to move said male prisoners into the women's estate. To remind us that the purpose of women's prisons is not to protect vulnerable males, and women shouldn't be buffers or victims of the men's prison service's inability to protect vulnerable male prisoners. Now, I know that some of you may well be feeling uncomfortable that I'm using the word male to describe transgender women. Such is the muddle we've got into in terms of conflating sex and gender. I was doing that to emphasise their sex rather than to be offensive or cause any problems. But such is the weight of coercive control and political pressure around identity politics that it can be difficult sometimes to state biological truth. And the biological truth is this: sex and gender are distinct. Sex is recognised in the law as the basis of women's rights. The prison estate is separated according to sex. Unless the government are advocating mixed-sex prison, women should have the expectation that they won't be locked up or housed with males. Any male who wishes to transition is free to do so. And in a tolerant society, I'd expect our approach to be: wear what you want, change your names, pronouns as you like, of course express your gender identity. However, none of this changes someone's sex, and people should not have their expectations of the same rights as women as a sex. If any trans prisoners are mistreated in the male estate, prison authorities should punish perpetrators and protect the victims, of course. But we need to untangle this humane response from the often bullying demand that we deny biological reality, or that the rights of transgender women can be used to sideline women's rights to single-sex provision. An important, hard-fought-for right, which I, as a woman, am not prepared to sell out just for political expediency or because it's unpopular. If necessary, special provision should be made for transgender prisoners, of course, and maybe the details, as people have described, are not what one would want. I think that, however, an attempt at resolving this in a humane way is why this amendment is so important. It's practical, it's a pragmatic solution for transgender prisoners who feel unsafe on the male estate, but it does not force women to give up their rights or compromise women and same-sex provision on the women's estate.
My Lords, I rise to speak against this amendment and would remind, I think we should remind ourselves when we talk about